Now, this is the daily Boris graph, and the item on the right is "Stop being so wet about rule Britannia," Johnson tells the BBC. Now, what is so wet about confessing to centuries of racist imperialism? What is wet about that? Except if the speaker or the source wants to perpetuate racist imperialism forever. Now, here on the bottom of the front page is the bogus historian, absolutely bogus historian Andrew Roberts, who is part of the corrupting industry of revising history. And he is part of the plot or part of the plotters that have invented Boris Johnson as a heavyweight comparable to the image constructed of Winston Churchill. So Andrew Roberts is saying on page 18, according to this front page kind of indication, that decent men should not be recast as bigots. It's not many inches away from Johnson speaking as a bigot. So the Daily Boris graph has got its agenda totally worked out, and it is part of the narrative of denying imperialism and the damage it did to the rest of the world for centuries. And that is what is still the bigotry, the empire mentality is still dominant in the minds of those who still hold the positions of power in this country. Quite apart from the other local difficulties. Now we shall be talking about these papers today. Is the first part A, of our world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. That is the newspapers mainly published from London from an Englishistic Little England perspective. Imperialist, racist, corrupt, and against the poor, and against society, and against justice, against universality, and against universal values, and against the obligations owed by all signatory states to all these declarations, charters, conventions, and treaties that established for the first time, and they began to establish for the first time in the late 1940s. Values that are now taken for granted sometimes in their commentaries and conversations, but values of human rights, universal human rights, values of equality, universal equality, values of fairness and justice and equality before the law, and all those values, they were not known to be values that were valued by the holders of power, holders of the levers of power and occupants in the positions of power over centuries in what is still just about the United Kingdom. And the centuries refers to the 18th century onwards, when the Scotland that is now so much different in terms of the slogans that are coming from Scotland. that was absorbed into the imperialist kind of arrangement dominated by the Little Englanders. And the Little Englanders still are little in their minds, and yet they magnify their comparative position and comparative superiority, the comparative kind of abilities compared to the rest of the world. And that is what is driving the daily Boris Graph, which is a confection of lies and created by liars and written by liars. This is the only paper that is still published in what is called broadsheet form. It's a kind of broadsheet. I mean, we're not going into the details of the technical differences between inches and centimeters and all the rest of it. Essentially, this is a broadsheet newspaper, and because of the size and the shape of the broadsheets and the tabloids, in the past, there was this automatic assumption that the broadsheets were heavy-duty, intellectually demanding and rigorous and fair and truthful organs as compared to the tabloids of the type that the Murdoch Sun is and has been. But the reality is that the Daily Tory Graph, the Boris Graph, is as much a lying organ, lying to the public, the British people, and most of its subscribers or readers, many of them are still subscribers, happen to be people over 50 or 60. That is what is the conventional understanding of the people who read this paper. And what that means is that these people are also likely to be, and on their records and their behavior, found to be prone to be still racist and longing for empire and rule Britannia. And rule Britannia is an absolutely unjustifiable theme. And the details are not necessary to be stated here again, because rule Britannia means British racist superiority empire and imperialism. And it was the most obscene defiance of the rights and the humanity and the traditions and the legacies and the contributions to humanity made by all these people in Africa and Asia, where rule Britannia was foisted on the people. And that is why it has become absolutely unsustainable, as they say, in 2020, to continue doing this ridiculous show, this ridiculous bragging and boasting and insulting of people and denying of people's rights. So who is hanging on to this bragging, boasting, racist celebration and claim? It is Boris Johnson, and it is Boris Johnson's graph, Tory graph, Telegraph, which paid Johnson 2,500 pounds, yes, 2,500 pounds for a piece he allegedly wrote once a week for the Boris Graph. Now, 2,500 pounds is way above the total weekly income of millions of people in this country. Millions. I'm not saying hundreds. Millions of people in this country. And one of the reasons why those millions are kept in that trap and this prison of poverty and low income and frustration at every level of their lives is because they have been brainwashed into actually dancing on the streets and screaming "Rule Britannia." I mean, they have been brainwashed. These are the most gullible of the gullibles. And so it's a paradox, it's a contradiction, it's an irony, but that is the reality. And that actually applies to all patriots. Patriots or patriotism is, of course, said to be the last resort of the scoundrels. And this is proving to be the case with Boris Johnson and the Boris Graf. Daily Boris Graf is leading the charge, Rule Britannia, charge against the enemies, imagined enemies. Now, what the Guardian is doing, the Guardian is the only pretentious newspaper among the quote Fleet Street, which is the London-centric, English-centric, Englishistic newspapers. We have shown the Irish Post today for a reason. The Irish Post not only is not anything to do with the Fleet Street line, but it is actually talking about something real. Not that the Ryanair boss who it is paddling about the green policy, but the actual word green is hardly ever printed on the front page or even in the center pages or in the inside pages of the Fleet Street Englishistic corrupt newspapers that are corruptly colluding and covering up, colluding with and covering up for the crooks that are destroying the planet and the environment. And we shall come to discussing Robert Jenrick's 80 plus pages of the rubbish plan to do away with so-called local council kind of say on the degenerate housing for the wealthy kind of scams. Now, we shall be also talking about this because it's the front page of the Morning Star that we started with, and the reason why we did that today, Wednesday the 26th of August, is that this is not anywhere. This is not anywhere in the main street papers. And the Morning Star is anyone who is watching this program for the first time perhaps deserves to know why I am calling the Morning Star Morning Scar, because after all I have just said that it is publishing something that the Englishistic mainstream so-called media are not publishing. The refugee who died in poverty beside a starving child. And the reason why I call it Morning Scar is based on the archives of its contents and the bias against the truth. Because it is owned by the Communist Party in Britain, not as untruthfully claimed by the paper by its readers. The readers are essentially, the main substance of the readers are essentially cabals of trade unions that it peddles from time to time, and they are kind of leaders who make significant donations to the paper, and the Communist Party members and some other individuals. I have been a student of the Morning Star strictly on the evidence, strictly as reference, not because I have any problem in identifying the corrupt contents of the agenda that they pursue. But here is the difference. Although they pursue the generally corrupt agenda that is anti-democratic, it is contemptuous of communities across the country, like all these so-called left outlets and outfits in Britain are. They are contemptuous of ordinary people. And they say they're socialist revolutionaries or socialists. Now, despite the fact that this is running a very accurate and timely and topical and important and genuine item there, and the Fleet Street papers are not. Essentially, this is a part of a narrative by the Morning Star and the Communist Party that they care about the migrants and the refugees and the African people and Asian people as compared to the uncaring and belligerently hostile attitude towards migrants and refugees exhibited daily by the rivals in the Fleet Street collection. But despite all this, despite this being a correct item, the Morning Star does not report anything from Tower Hamlets. It is based in Tower Hamlets. It's based in Tower Hamlets, so therefore it has no excuse to pretend that it doesn't know what is going on or what the ordinary people have to say about the local Tower Hamlets Council or the local MPs for that matter, or the local agencies, including the police, and the role of the police and the role of others who are in place, in posts by public funding, meaning the ordinary people's money. And what are they doing? What are these organizations, these individuals, these post holders doing about delivering service to the community? And so many things have gone wrong in Tower Hamlets, wrong done by the corrupt Tower Hamlets Council cabal and the so many crooks sitting as councillors and repeatedly seeking and getting elected as councillors. But the Morning Star knows nothing of those things. It has its eyes, rhetorical eyes, shut, its ears shut, and its mouth, that is the paper itself, is completely gagged, self-gagged. So I'm saying that the Morning Star is corrupting the image of the so-called left, just like the socialist workers and the others in the business of doing, quote, politics in the name of socialism. And there is a general agenda by the Morning Star, which has got its lines very much parallel to or kind of in tandem with or following the international line followed by the current regime in Russia. So it has got everything that the Russians kind of condemn, the Morning Star condemns as well. Everything the Russian regime wants to hide, the Morning Star pretends not to know about. And so therefore it is the same thing with international, quote, politics and international kind of policy, so-called, as it is with the collusion with the corrupt local, quote, labor councils. And this is why I call it Morning Scar. That is, it's a scar on the truth and the scar on the claim that it is a different newspaper, and morally and ethically it is much better and much more truthful or near the truth than the Sun, the Express, the Daily Mail, etc. I mean, this is something that the Morning Scar's editors or representatives of the Communist Party or their kind of allies have argued for years. When the BBC, mainly BBC, they don't talk so much about the Sky or ITV or Channel 4, but they say the BBC should include the Morning Star. Well, this is my word, but their name is Morning Star, of course, in the daily list of newspapers that the BBC promotes online and in its programs, including the so-called press review, or look at the front pages of the following day. And there is no Morning Star in the BBC's kind of programming, and it doesn't get featured. It does get featured once, maybe every 2 or 3 years, when there is absolutely something unexpected and surprising on the Morning Star's front page, because this is a kind of the BBC's press review or press preview and the Sky's counterpart are based on mainly the front pages, because practically in terms of distribution, the timing, the schedules, when these programs are actually broadcast, the main paper, the contents of the insides of the pages of the papers have not arrived at these stations or have not been published yet. So it's hours after that the actual full pages of the papers are put together and available at outlets and so-called news agents. But whatever part of the papers they actually exhibit and parade, they don't parade the Morning Star. And the Morning Star is not a revolutionary paper. It is not threatening anything. All it is doing is serving as a palliative to the cause of the dead politics of the so-called left in Britain. And it is doing this kind of thing just to keep up the appearance of being different and genuinely for the victims of the system, the capitalist system, they say. But Russia is doing the same capitalist system. So, but that is a different kind of subtopic. We are not going to discuss too much of that, because of the focus here is on the other papers as well. So there are the usual number of, quote, so-called anti-Tory items, and usual number of items about poverty and that sort of thing, eviction, as we have shown in previous editions of the Khudilar television. But what I'm saying, based on the contents of the Morning Star of the last, say, 40 years or whatever number of years it has been in existence for, it used to be the Daily Worker, and it has become the Morning Star. And the Morning Star does not recognize Black people or Asian people as equal. And it does not recognize people who are actively campaigning for justice and human rights in this country or anywhere. If an Asian or African person is recommended to the Morning Star by the Communist Party bureaucracy as being fit for the promotion by the Morning Star, then they do it. Okay, so what we'll be doing, we'll be ending this part here, and we'll resume in a few minutes the next part and continue the diagnosis of the Morning Star and the other.